instituted. So anyways, looking forward to what's coming in the next year for the organization. So for today's topic, we have Jill Stott, who will be talking about scaled agile do's and don'ts. She's the Vice President of Innovation at NextUp Solutions, and really looking forward to the discussion today. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I will give her the floor. So thanks, Jill.
Thank you so much, Ben, and welcome everybody. I'm happy to be here for your Austin Agile group, and I hear it's a really active group. That's amazing. So before I jump in and start sharing my slide deck, I'm curious, all the people here who have been in some type of a scaled Agile environment, whether you are a coach or a participant or you're a manager, if you don't mind going down at the bottom of Zoom and then click the little smiley face that says reactions and give me a thumbs up if you have, or you could give a thumbs down. Ooh, got about, I'm going to say 30%, about half of you have as well. All right, so as I go through my presentation, if you have questions or things to add, you can feel free to interrupt me. I'll also be paying attention to chat. If you have a question there that you'd like me to address, I've reserved time at the end to go over some Q&A, but sometimes we forget what our question was if I wait till the end. All right, let me share my screen. Boom, boom. All right, so I want to start with this slide here. And I thought this picture was a pretty cool example of a concert at scale, if you will, if you'll allow me a little analogy here. So I think I don't go to concerts anymore because I'm old, but a big concert like this, if I have 50,000 people, you see in this picture, they're aligning together. They're self-organized. I guess they're waving their hands in the air like they just don't care. No one had to tell them and direct them to do that. If I had a concert of like one or two, then I wouldn't need a lot of extra infrastructure. So if I had a whole bunch of people in this stadium, in order to make sure things don't devolve into chaos, where individuals, for example, are prioritizing their own wants over the safety and fun of everyone else, that's going to be a problem and it's going to make it bad for everybody. So I think about as the concert, if the larger it is, the more infrastructure, the more rules you have. Okay, you're going to have these bands and you're going to be in this location for the standee up people who like to mosh and so forth. So kind of similar to when we're actually creating an Agile at scale, when I have multiple peoples or multiple teams, that the context is, hey, how do we keep them aligned? So for this, I guess 45 minutes, we're going to talk about just some do's and don'ts. And from what I've learned in the last 25 plus years. All right. So a little bit about me. As Ben mentioned, my name is Jill Stott, and I work at NextUp Solutions. I'm an Agile coach. I'm the Vice President of Innovation, and I do a lot of training as well. So NextUp is a full service Agile shop where we have coaching, we have training, we have consulting. And a little bit more, I've been in IT for at least 25 years. When I started, there was no such thing as process. And then we spent years in waterfall and we tried all these different processes of the month and then finally landed in Agile and in Scrum. And that was where I was like, and I got the opportunity to be a Scrum Master and kind of grew my career from there. And a lot of the different training. In fact, in our Kanban training, that's where I met Leland. He was in my Kanban training and he reached out and said, hey, do you want to speak at Austin Agile? I said, I do. Here's a little bit more information. I don't know if I could send this out if you want this PDF, all the slides for my LinkedIn me. And I'm starting my YouTube channel. I've been starting podcasting. All right. So what is Agile at scale? So there's two interpretations. This is a long quote that I found, but there's two flavors, if you will. There's the one where I have multiple teams. I have 5 different teams, and they're all working on a common solution. That's one form of scaling. There's also a scaling paradigm where it's, okay, we've taken this particular business unit within our organization and we made them agile, whatever that means, right? And now we want to actually start moving that out across the company. All right, IT is agile. Now, what about these other components? So I'm going to focus a little bit on each one of those. So let's start with our big teams, our team of teams, scaling up or SCUP, if you will. So this is the context where, hey, I've noticed that if in order to deliver the value that we want in the time frame that we want, we need more people. And so the thought is, okay, I've got these individual teams, and then I have some type of infrastructure around them to keep them aligned to the common goal. So just like at that concert, one team doesn't start to sub-optimize and actually affect adversely the overarching goal of whatever solution that you're creating. And then our scaling out. So here's just a visual representation of what I just mentioned. A lot of times I've noticed, well, myself as a coach, they pull me in and say, hey, we really want to transition to Scrum or to whatever framework. And we start in IT, and a lot of times we stop there. And in my experience, we made a lot of progress using Agile in the IT shop, but then we could only get so far. For example, our finance was one of the companies worked for, extremely old school, if you will, very traditional. And we were trying to carve things out into small increments, but they still wanted us to get budget for a year or two. So we were planning for a year or two in order to meet their needs. So the thought is, hey, how can I strategically roll this out where it makes sense to these different components? And it will be a different look and feel when you're using it in the IT crowd versus marketing, for example. They have different needs. You'll need to provide different examples. All right, so we've got 5 do's and don'ts. Here's number 1. Do scale up only if needed, and do add additional overhead only as it's needed, only as it's adding value. And then don't, for a lot of you, we're all converts, don't scale up just for scaling's sake. And we don't want to add additional waste. So those of you familiar with lean, waste is stuff we do that takes time and money. It's not adding value, and it's not necessary. I'm always looking for little pieces of waste that we can eliminate in order to have more time to actually build things that people want and need. So I've been in several organizations where they said, hey, I just learned about this new scaling framework. And what we're going to do is just go full steam ahead. We're going to transition all thousands of people within our organization, and you've got 2.5 months to do it. And whenever I hear that, this is me, blurg. It might look good on paper as far as checking the box. Yep, we did it. But then as a coach and as a team member, going in and seeing so much of the dysfunction caused by that large rollout and that quick bang approach was really, really painful. And there was a ton of resistance. And in a lot of ways, it set us back. So some things to think about before you jump into scaling. How do I know if I should even go into that type of added infrastructure when I have more people on my team? So I created this little chart, this little flow chart to ask yourself a couple of key questions. So number 1, do we consistently have more demand than we have capacity? So you might have tons of requests coming from your customer base, from your business partners that's saying, hey, we want more stuff faster. And as we can only get so much stuff out of the team or 2 teams that we have. And the thought is, oh, we'll just make them work longer hours. That does not work. You'll actually get less done. So if that's consistently the issue, not just a one-time or a couple-time thing splurged. Oh, thank you, Chris. Yes, Tina Fey. That is where I got it from. So yes. So if no, I'd be like, why are we scaling? Why are we adding this extra overhead? And then 2, and this is, I've learned almost everything I've learned about Agile and process the hard way because I did everything wrong. So 1, before we start adding in those different techniques to align various groups or 1,000 of people or 150 people, are we already familiar with the fundamentals of Agile, of Scrum, of Lean, of Kanban? Are our teams practicing that? I feel really bad, multiple teams. Oh, it's hard to see the screen. Oh, it'll get better in a minute it's probably the white background. And then, so anyway, so we get that fundamentals going. If you transition from waterfall straight into scaling, it's overwhelming. And you'll spend so much time floundering if we don't have the fundamentals down on that team level. So if we've got a decent amount of that, then sure. Next question. So you have to ask yourself, do we know, are we pretty darn confident that even though we have this more demand coming in, will we actually generate more revenue or whatever, if you're a nonprofit, more value to your customers? Not just like, hey, this would be cool if we did all this fun stuff, but is it really going to get that return on investment? If that's the case, you have a good case for scaling. And then once we decided, hey, we already have a team of 50 people working on a solution, at what point do we add additional scaling practices in? Rather than taking everything you learned in a textbook and saying, let's apply that all, I like to start it kind of small and then see where we need to add more infrastructure as we go. So a couple key things to look for. Are we missing quality and delivery expectations because the teams are misaligned? So I worked we were all in Scrum teams, and then we decided to use SAFe. Before we used SAFe, I was testing and I'd be like, whoa, where did this new feature came from? I had no visibility into what the other teams are putting. We're completely misaligned. We were continually having quality issues and very hard to make our release dates. So that was a key factor that influenced us in moving to a little bit of a scaling adaptation so we could keep aligned. Or if I'm just not seeing the bigger picture, like I can see what my little team's doing, but I don't understand how it fits into the bigger picture, the bigger solution, the vision that we have going forward for our solution. And that could be a small practice that you add. Hey, every 3 months we get together and I share, this is where we're going. This is what we want to do. This is what our customers are. And this is what they look like and what they expect. So when I'm developing stuff, I have that in my mind. So I'm not making stuff that I think would be awesome, but it doesn't actually meet or solve the problems of my end users. So then as that, you'll just iterate on this and think, okay, whoa, we're still missing things. First of all, optimize what you do now, and then potentially adding additional pieces. All right, does this slide look better, Bill? I hope so. All right, so start small. You're gonna hear me say this about 4 other times. And I'm not a big fan of the big blitz agile transformation. So when I'm scaling out, so I like to start with one small subset of your org. So a lot of you have done this before as Scrum Masters, Agile coaches, and managers, I'm sure, where, okay, we pick a team or a couple of teams and they're open to it. So we work through that and then we learn and we adapt. So, okay, we inspect and adapt. What are some things we did wrong? What are some things we can do better? And then we make some changes to maybe our rollout plan and how we're going to communicate this change. And then I go to the next subset. So now you have this small group of people who are functioning well within Agile. And now we can roll that out to other components of your organization. I can go to my HR group and say, hey, how can we help you? What are your pain points? Let's see what we can do to implement some of these things our other group here has had really good success with. So I like this approach here, the low-hanging fruit. So start here with what you think would be easiest and start building that out as you go. Before you reach up here to the tippity top, finance, love my finance friends, that's a harder nut to crack. And it will have to probably be a slightly different way of using Agile than maybe an IT team, for example. All right, so now scaling up. So less is more. So add a small amount of scaling practices. So just another example, when I was actually in a different group where we were doing scaled Agile, the scaled Agile framework, and we only had 2 teams, but we were mandated to do it. And it was so much extra stuff that we had to do. And we could have just called each other. And even we were in different places in the world, but still it was too much. So what we ended up doing over the course of learning is scale back our scaling Rather than having a PI planning that went 2 days, it lasted 4 hours. I called it safe light. Make it work for you. Make the tool work for you and your people. And then just like before, our nice little inspect loop, and then inspect. Hey, what are some missing pieces? Looking at the end user experience is the most important place to start. And then working back. Are employees happier? Or are they mad and frustrated? Let's make some updates and changes to what we've added as far as the scaling components. I'm cruising. Any questions, thoughts so far? Tom.
So in your experience, like what you're describing right now, do you think this is more successful when you can clearly kind of isolate that team so that they are independent from the rest of the larger organization?
Give me an example.
So I work at General Motors, and we've been implementing scaled agile for a while right now. And one of the biggest challenges that we have are dependencies that are outside the immediate team's control. So we need integrations with shared services teams or infrastructure teams. So we're trying to implement something, but we can't be self-contained, and we end up getting impacted by their processes of how they work, and can't just contain it just to ourselves.
Yes, that's a very common thing, especially with large organizations where, hey, it'd be awesome if we were all this small cadre of 150 people that were self-contained, but I don't see that very often. So the thought is, rather than pulling all of those shared services in together, then you have your scaled group here, which could be your implementers, and then having to set up some communication channels with those outside groups like your shared services, and having a loose structure to make that happen so there's not the misalignment. And then what I like to do is identify how long does it take, actually get the data when we have these interdependencies across all these different components. Oh, it takes us 4 extra days because of this, and then put it into dollar amounts so to hopefully try to blend them a little bit potentially. Did that answer your question? It's not like that's a complicated thing, but that is what some of my frustrations were as well when I was on a team of teams. It was all that other stuff outside of us that we had no control over.
Yeah, it just my observation is the more self-contained the team is, the better, the easier it is to start small. Because in my observation, it's not just the communication, but there's the capacity request from those other teams, and also coordinating the timeline of their delivery of, their scheduled delivery with our scheduled delivery. So the more self-contained, the better chance you have to start small.
That's a really good point, Tom. I see exactly what you're saying. Like, hey, Jill, in theory, this is great to start small, but all our problems are outside. There are some cases for a big bang approach. All right, everybody, this thing is broken. We all need to align to at least a couple of things within this framework in order to, like Tom said, align our schedules. So we know your service level agreement, when we request this, we know how long it will take. So that's a really good argument for that. Thank you. And I think it was Edward. I think I saw your hand raised as well.
Thanks, Jill. One of the things that we talk about during the job hackers class that we have for people that are coming back into the industry and that are being reintroduced to Agile, one of the things that we talk about scaling is, if things are working well at the garage level, it's more important to build more garages rather than, and have good software be built out of garages than trying to be able to do that larger scaling. Part of Tom's question that kind of really was striking to me was, how would you advise or recommend taking one of those larger problems where there are more dependencies and taking a slice of it so that you can be able to build off a team, or be able to take a team that's already working on this to be able to do that smaller scaling up that you're talking about?
So give me an example.
If you were dealing with a larger IT infrastructure kind of project, being able to look at, for maybe just a small portion of the monitoring that would only be accessible through a mobile app or something else like that, or something even lower weight than that. But being able to, and saying, okay, this is where our team is going to be starting to use Agile just to develop this portion of this as you are moving forward. And then having other sections that could be Agile as you build up and scale from there. That was the example I was giving. I was actually asking if you had an example or some advice from your personal experience.
Yes. I think I was like, paint me a picture. No, that's exactly what I would recommend. So I've worked in a lot of groups where as a coach, where they said, okay, this subset, we want to go Agile. We're ready to do Scrum, for example. But they had interdependencies with people who were still waterfall. And they didn't have the political clout, I guess, to do the big bang, let's have everybody change. So what they did, these other teams that they were interacting with, they were doing waterfall, old school waterfall. So it's just, okay, let's start with where we are now and then build this little unit. And then at least try to get those commonalities between those waterfall teams. The main thing is, when will we have this back? A service level agreement, and start with that team there. Okay, when we have a request come in, about how long will it take to get it done? And then that helps that Agile team, and then you can grow together. And then you reach that point, that tipping point, if you will, where, okay, maybe this waterfall team, it makes sense for them to adapt to an Agile construct. Great point. Okay. So number 3, and this goes to kind of what Edward was saying here, create small cross-functional feature teams when you can, and don't put everyone on a giant team. So this little picture here, so I use this because it was an example when there's another team I was on, I think I was testing, and we had, oh my goodness, almost 100 people that were working on a given application. And they said, hey, let's do Scrum. And we're like, what's Scrum? Okay, whatever. And so they carved it into 3 big teams. And we had 30 people on each team. And I'll never forget, we would have our stand-up every morning. And we'd get in this giant room, 30 people. And they made us stand up, and it was miserable. It took forever. And it was not ideal, not just because of the meetings, but because I can't have really collaborative conversations and working sessions with 30 people because of the many communication channels. So what happened is we automatically just created small subsets of teams on our own. And then we were these weird little silos that were supposed to be in this team. And it didn't work so well. So I liken it here to, the thought is it's just cheaper and less expensive if we put everybody in this giant yacht or this cruise ship or whatever, but it makes it harder to pivot and turn as well as decreases that collaboration. So what we want is to create these team of teams, or TOT, these small speedboats. I can't talk today. These small speedboats, and each one is self-organized, and they might have a different perspective, and maybe they're building a different component of this single solution than another team is. And so they have that commonality, but they're all aligned and they're going in the same direction, right? Wait, this is where we're headed. We're going to have to actually work together at some point in order to achieve the optimum goal. So there's our TOT versus one big team. Fragile. All right. So another thing, the concept, and I saw a question here about architecture group. And let's talk that, Bill. Let's talk about that a little bit more. So this idea of cross-functional team, what's a cross-functional team? So in a perfect world, you'll have a small team, one of your small speedboats, that within that team themselves, they have all of the skills necessary amongst themselves, not each individual, in order to take something from, hey, here's an idea, we can build it, we can test it and deploy it. That's great. You want most of those smaller teams that you carve out to be that. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. Sometimes you might want to have single specialty teams. Examples I'm thinking of are our DBAs, our architects, our designers, UX, UI designers. We tried to do that at one of my organizations where, hey, let's get a DBA for every single team. And they're like, first of all, we can't afford it. Second of all, there's not enough work. So they function as this peripheral team. They could be a smaller team with a specialty, or they come in and they work with the teams and they move out, they move in and move out. And then making sure from the architecture and design perspective that all of the teams are aligned to that common architecture and that common look and feel. The analogy here is the chessboard. Tell me if this works. I just kind of thought of this, where when you're playing chess, and I'm not an expert, but I do have Chess for Dummies, and I play that a couple of times. There's different pieces that have different strategies and different skills. So I have my pawns and they can move a certain way. I have my horses and they can move a certain way. And collectively, they're all moving towards the same goal, even though they work in a little bit different fashion. So imagine if you're playing chess and some cool idea to scale it, you decided to create separate boards, and you have the pawns on one board, the knights on another board, the queen on another board, and then you're trying to cross coordinate those interdependencies. You think about the delays of trying to have those communication channels, and they would break down, and it would not be very cool. So there's my chessboard analogy. All right, any questions, thoughts before I move to number 4? Oh, sorry, I'm just reading Bill. I'm in the chat here from Bill. Then you must not have done a design sprint for a week. Maybe you need an architecture sprint. Yes, thank you. That's exactly what I recommend. We want our design people to be working up front. So a couple of things we would do, we'd bring, even if they weren't on the team, we'd say, okay, you're working one sprint ahead. Sometimes for designers, Kanban might be a better fit than Scrum, but they have those little pieces set up beforehand. So I'm not waiting and then just not watching cat videos rather than doing the work I need to do. And then those designers and architects come back to validate, yes, we implement this correct. We're working together quite a bit. We don't want to have those siloed skill sets. All right, number 4, do match the team Agile framework to the type and nature of the work, and don't make all the teams conform to a single team level framework. So again, my organization where they mandated safe for everybody, they also mandated every single team within that larger team of teams will be doing Scrum. So we said, okay, and I think Scrum is cool. And then as I talked to some of the different groups, they said, Jill, Scrum is not working for us. I said, well, why not? And a lot of them were operations teams or those design teams or data analytics. Data analytics, it's hard to make that arbitrary, let's do this in 2 weeks or less. And then you're just cutting them arbitrarily, and it didn't really make sense. So we had the argument we took back to senior management. Hey, can we have some flexibility introducing maybe a Kanban for some of these different teams? So they put all these rules in place, and it did make things a little bit better. But if I go in and introduce scaling, or if I'm not even scaling, I really like to respect the team and have a conversation with them and find out which one would probably fit them best. So my picture here is this fella here. So you think about this shirt, it's doing the job, right? It's the framework that's covering him is doing the job sort of, but it's an ill fit. It's an ill fit. It's not quite going to be the tool that will be the most advantageous. So here you could have a team of teams, and maybe each group is doing Scrum. Maybe some of them are doing a combination of Scrum and Kanban. And then maybe you have a Kanban team. So when I introduce that, people are like, oh, how are we going to keep aligned? If they're doing 2-week sprints and they're not doing any sprints, what are we going to do? Well, that's where you guys come in. Then we want to have this a little bit extra, I call overhead, but sometimes it's necessary, connection points, right? So we don't spend too much time going off and doing the wrong thing or the thing wrong, where we're potentially having our demos on a regular cadence, where we're doing our inspect and adapts on a regular cadence with everybody, and having that visibility is key. thoughts, questions on this concept? I have some people really push back on this. There's like, we're hungry, we're tired. All right, thanks, Chris. Plus that picture, he just looks so happy. Number 5, do establish a cross-team communication strategy. So communication is such a large nebulous word, but it's things like, hey, how are we going to keep aligned? What does alignment mean? If I do have those interdependencies between teams, part of that is a mutual understanding of what it means when something is done, what it means when I say, hey, I request this piece of work from you, and I need to know when I'll get it back. Even if it's not to my satisfaction, having it just go out to this other dependent team in a black hole is really wasteful for everybody. And having that empathy and understanding across other teams. I was on a Scrum team. We had a lot of interdependencies between all of the Scrum teams within our train. And we would have something that we would request from another team, and we never knew it was going to be done. So we were like, oh, they don't even care about us. No. Once we got to talking to them, that wasn't it at all. They were so overburdened. Plus, they didn't have that visibility into the requests we were making. So the system was a bit broken. So a lot of my fellow coaches say, hey, we don't really need to add any extra infrastructure if we're having a team of teams collaborating. We assume people just step up. They'll just say, hey, let's walk over here and fix this. Let's go over this and figure this out together. It would be great if that worked that way. And I'm sure in a lot of organizations that could happen. In my experience, it doesn't. We're busy people and really tend to focus on what we are doing now. Some different things you could do in order to collaborate in a low fidelity fashion. Hey, if each team has someone that's like a Scrum Master role, have those people coordinate occasionally. Maybe adding a Scrum of Scrums, for example, in order to do something intentionally rather than just relying on hope. Hope's not a good strategy in a lot of cases. So here's a couple concrete practices, and please share any others with us that you know of. I'm always learning. So a shared backlog. One group I worked with, we had each one of had our own isolated backlogs, and we didn't have permissions to see what other teams were working on, how they were progressing on their sprint, so to speak. And it was very hard to understand where my stuff, because I was testing the whole application, right? Not just what my team did. And there was so much rework I had to do when I was rewriting my automation test scripts, for example. So having some type of construct where I can have visibility into everything that that team of teams is doing. It could be a hierarchical backlog where you have it all these individual teams, so I can see a view of that, or I can see it collectively, and I can see that larger goal and how that is progressing. And I just love that stuff too. And then some type of combined planning, whatever that means. Maybe you are running safe, and that PI planning you do on a regular cadence where every 3 months or so, you all get together and say, here is what we're going to be doing potentially for the next chunk of time. You could be doing your sprint plannings together. If you're familiar with the large scaled Scrum, that's what they recommend. Hey, for each sprint planning, we take individuals from each one of these teams and we work together. We look at the backlog and they pick which items they're going to work on, so they understand what the interdependencies are before they even start the work. They can have those conversations at the beginning. Let's see. Okay. And then the feedback loops. All right, everyone loves lots of meetings. No, they don't. There's like so much money wasted in meetings that don't add value. So I'm always assessing when we have these meetings, we get value from them. Here's the intent. Here's the purpose of this scaled meeting. And then I always ask myself, did we achieve that? Hey, we had 50 people in this scaled retrospective. And let's just say every one of them made $100 an hour. It costs us $500 or or $5,000. Was it worth it? So putting it into monetary terms will help you fine tune those meetings so they do add value. And then having those clearly defined overarching goals from a business perspective and from a technical perspective, from a cybersecurity perspective, from a quality perspective. All of those pieces have to play together, and each team needs to have that common definition of this is what good means, and this is how we're going to achieve it. And working agreements, I think I saw something like a common language, having working agreements. What are working agreements? This is how we work together. This is how we get value. This is how we collaborate. This is how we handle conflict. This is our expectations when we show up to a meeting. And then having a certain component of those individual team working agreements also extend to the team of team structure. We'll also keep them aligned kind of on a cultural basis as well as a tactical basis. Then our engineering practices. So I've been on a team of teams where, man, there was one team, they were rock stars. They were doing so great. They were doing their code reviews on a consistent basis. They were doing their static analysis. They were doing TDD and all that good stuff. And then we had some other teams that were like, what's test-driven development? What? And then sharing the stuff that you learned with the other teams, right? You're not competing against each other. You should be working together and having moments of, hey, I just found this cool tool in order to test security, for example. Let's share it so we can all grow together rather than have one team that's just always doing all this cool stuff and we don't get to. Oh, and Prima just asked, can the working agreements change? Yes, please. Yes, please. Always be changing your working agreements. When you have one of those team of team meetings, I like to have it and keep them short, keep them concise, or nobody will ever read them. And then say, hey, do these still make sense? Some of them will just become part of the culture and we can delete that and then potentially add another one. So I think I already talked about this, kind of the engineering practices, that design and architecture, the team of teams, making sure that we are aligned to that. So if you think about single team Scrum back in the early 2000s, they said, hey, the architecture should just evolve naturally as you go. And I love that in theory, but when you have a team of teams and you don't have an architecture plan that's cross sections all of the different teams and said, here's what we're going to align to, and you have no commonality. It's actually happened in that group where we had 3 teams of 30 people. We'd have Rockstar Dave doing his own architecture, create this whole different thing. The other teams didn't know about it. It broke the way that we were doing work. And we actually had to take some time out, develop a Tiger team to refactor the whole database and how it interacted with the application. Waste. And like I talked about, that definition of done. Hey, my team's done. We're good. We finished all our stories for this iteration. Cool. Do all of the different things that you checked in play well with what everybody else checked in? How are we going to do our regression testing for everything? If we're going to start implementing a DevOps pipeline, that requires everyone to understand what that looks like and what done actually means. All right, let's see. I'm trying to read these. Martina, who is the gatekeeper for the taught engineering practices? How do you introduce a new member? So a couple of things on like, who owns this? And I do a lot of scaled agile, but I like to have a point person. So the engineering practices, if there is a development lead, that makes sense. That totally makes sense for that person to be the point person. Doesn't mean they're dictating everything, but they're keeping it coordinated. For architecture, a lot of times you'll have a lead architect or a lead UX UI designer who leads that effort in order to dictate what we're going to do and then make sure that we're aligned as we're developing. All right, I think that's my last one. Questions? Oh, here we go. Q&A. Oh, Max, I see Max's hand is raised.
Yes, thank you, Jill. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can, sir.
Awesome. I actually had a comment on the last slide where you're saying, hey, what might some other people be doing?
Oh,
And
yes.
I've noticed that at my company, as I've been leading agile transformations for 12 plus years in some form, me and my team of agile coaches, what we've come to the realization away from process frameworks and all of that is there are two main things that we help like these large organizations of like 600 people or so. And it's the two main things are, first, we want people to be focusing on the right work. It's incredible how randomly people just start to work on stuff that is not even part of the committed, prioritized work to our business stakeholders. And then we ask, how come this happened? Well, I don't know. It just showed up in the backlog. It came through in PI planning or whatever the case may be. So we have everybody on the same tool, Jira, and somehow in a quarterly manner, all we want is that people identify the key work that they're doing. And so we make sure that it's aligned with our the priorities. And the other thing, which I think is one of the most fundamentally value add things of Agile, is not that you can deliver things faster in small increments, but it's that you get feedback faster. Feedback faster. That's the key thing. So, because everybody's like, oh, we can go faster. We can go faster. But if you continuously deliver the wrong thing faster, it doesn't really help you. Okay. So this whole concept is like, demo the working software, get it into a dev environment, stuff like that. And we have our agile coaches helping to remove the impediments that might show up in having to do that. And it's incredible by just having teams know this is what we want to do. A lot of the other stuff, you have the autonomy. Do you want to do Scrumban or Kanban or Scrum or whatever the case may be? As long as you track your work in Jira, like the one tool that we all have, do whatever you want to do. And then we've noticed, my last point is that some teams do much better than some other teams. And so then we create forums where teams can come and share their best practices. And it's incredible when people learn from each other, what that creates, right? It's not, because at my company, we've had consulting companies that came in the past and everything and did a massive agile transformation, and people are not following stuff that was done before. But when people talk to each other and say, hey, this is what I did to automate all my regression testing, people start to say, oh yeah, let's schedule a meeting. Let's do this. You use my same tools. You have my same challenges and all of that. And it's just incredible to see things happen when sometimes we can maybe step back from some of the process frameworks and a few of those things and just have people focus on stuff.
Yes,
Just
thank you.
Share.
Thank you so much for sharing, Max. I love that when it's a grassroots movement rather than saying you will have a community of practice, then nobody wants to do it.
No,
And
it's a forced meeting.
Right. Yeah, no, thank you. I'll be playing on my phone. Yeah, it's that culture. And that's really what we're here is to improve the culture and to just engender that. And I love what you said about let's build the right thing and find out if we're not sooner than later to save time and money and frustration. I had a boss who said, are we doing Agile to move faster so we can provide more crap faster?
And that happens a lot. It actually happens a lot.
It does. And I'm sure I've been guilty too. This would be cool. Let's add this, where I forget and I need to have that alignment. So thank you.
Cool.
Yes. And community of practice. I think those are great. And I love if those of you who are Scrum Masters, Agile coaches, or individual contributors say, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we did this? And whoever can come. And those to me are magical. And from their inception, it could be a short-lived thing. Oh, now we have to go every single week. Hey, do it till it no longer adds value and then spin up another one. Edward, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. The other question, somewhat related to, as we're talking about building communities of practice, what do you have when you have challenges where people are potentially more third-party or potentially more vendors that are concentrated on being that kind of role? So you were talking about the highest of fruit as opposed to low-hanging fruit, and you had mentioned finances. Another one that comes to mind is legal. How do you incorporate, things that need extensive legal and privacy review and other things into these larger communities of practice or building up? Or is that just something where, do you have any tips for how to inject them in at a different level where they can still interact, even if you're not fully introducing Agile into a law firm.
That's a great example. And I work with a lot of government people where it's that, and it is what it is. But I like the idea of just a conversation. And generally as a coach, I like to, maybe I'd go to somebody in legal and I'd say, what are your pain points? I would start with them rather than saying, here's what you need to do for us. What's driving you crazy? What are the hard things for you as far as interacting with these other teams? And then have the same conversation with the teams in regard to the legal component. And then, hey, let's just meet and talk about these. We're not going to solve them all, but just having that empathy, understanding from each side, that's step one. And then figure out what are some things we can do to start shrinking those lead times and those frustrations. That's my suggestion. All right, Bill, your chats are awesome. I can't read them. They're so long. Bill, do you want to pipe in? You don't have to. I'm not going to call you out, Mr. Bill. Or Mr. Bill. Oh, Bill's smart. All right, any other thoughts, questions before we... Oh, your microphone doesn't work. Bill, I'm sorry, I didn't know. Okay, good luck. Good luck. See, now I'm going to read it with a weird tone. I think about having a definition done is a detriment. Ooh, unless it's ongoing. Yes. Yes. Yes, it's not changing. I remember one team, I was a UI toolkit team. We created a definition of done and then we archived it and never looked at it again. That's so dumb. Keep it lightweight too. It's not set in stone. And if it is, you're doing it wrong. Tom, see your hand is up.
Yeah, I had a question. In your observation with the different organizations that you've worked with, where do you most commonly see a scaled agile framework first getting promoted? Meaning, like, is it coming from the IT organization, the engineering organization? Do you see it coming often from the business organization? Where do you most usually see it coming from?
I think I've only ever seen it come from the IT first, honestly. Well, in Agile in general. I'm trying to think of a case. Well, we had people on board with this from the business perspective on a lot of cases, but it tends, I have my theories why, to kind of, hey, here's our pain points. And then it's introduced a lot of times by the IT. And then it's having that conversation with our business partners. Here's what's in it for you. Because they want to move faster. They are tired of building the wrong thing. And then it hopefully becomes collaborative. But in most cases, it tends to start in the IT world. The
I would love to
producers.
hear one of your opinions of why you think that happens.
We need another of these webinars.
Yeah, I think we do. This is Brian, and Tom and I work together at GM. And, I wonder about when you're like a whole transformation of when companies are used to outsourcing engineering, right? Your software engineering, not IT, like, email and that stuff, but actual engineering, creating products. How do you bring that around? Because I think, it was a lot easier when you just hire you outsource and say, create me this application, create me this functionality, and then, the responsibility is really on the contractor. So there's a big mind shift there. Have you had any experience with that?
Yes. Like I said, government, almost all of their IT workers are contract companies. And it is a continual struggle. So they have a few employees that are there year after year after year. And then they roll in these different components and they have very little visibility in how they process stuff. And they're continually missing their deadlines. Here, in a perfect world, Toyota production system, and I know this isn't probably reasonable, but before they actually contract with a supplier that's supplying them goods and services, they spend time where they have to adapt at least part of their processes to match what Toyota is doing. I don't have the details on that, but at the very least, we need to have predictability from your perspective. We still need to have feedback loops. We need to see what you're doing before the 6 months is over to find out we're doing the wrong thing. Is it sustainable? And 2 touch points like that you'd want to set up before you even create those contracts, is my thought. Any other people? This is a really good topic, actually. It's a deep one. And there are thoughts on how you handle those third-party interactions when they don't report to anyone in your organization. Oh, sorry, I'm running out of time. But here, one last thought on that. I'm just like, my brain is spinning. Where it's finding some shared goals and commonalities, like I said, step 1. And it's always going to be harder and take longer when you do have all those interdependencies, particularly if they're outside your group. That's the nature of the beast. It's a trade-off. Hey, we think we can do it cheaper. There's still that mentality that people who develop software, they're like just building widgets. It's a very creative endeavor, and it requires a lot of collaboration. So we build the right thing and the thing right. And it's something that you can maintain after they leave as well. All right. I think we're out of time, Ben. Ben's giving me the signal. It's like, cut it.
Yeah, I think we are just about at time. So I wanted to thank Jill for everything that she went over today. And we did have one quick announcement from Edward Gordon, another call for volunteers for his organization. So Ed, do you want to take this one?
Thanks so much, Ben. If you could let me, I'm not sure if I can share this my screen right now. If
I will
make me
stop.
Co-host, I can do that.
Stop sharing.
Excellent. So I'm coming here also from the Job Hackers. We offer free 6-week classes that are teaching people about not just Scrum and Agile, but also teaching them about test-driven development, behavior-driven development, cognitive biases, queuing theory. We have a long list of books that, even some things I still haven't finished. Reinhard Sinn's Principles of Product Development Flow is a little bit hard to get through sometimes. Being, writing as a nuclear submarine scientist or engineer. But one of the things that we realized was that this class is very theoretical and presents people with a really good idea of the high level basis as they are coming back in. And this is for those that are unemployed or underemployed and people that are coming back into the industry. So we have built an extension of that program over the last 2 years where we take people that are alumni of that 6-week free class, and they can apply to be a part of this program where they are placed on a Scrum team and they serve both as developers and they serve as stakeholders, which is they're wearing 2 separate hats because what they are developing, what the product is that they are collectively developing is their collective job search. So they are getting practice actually implementing Scrum on a weekly basis with week-long sprints. And it's a 9-person team typically for developers. I'm getting some skeptical looks, and that is also because the people that are volunteering to be able to be the Scrum Masters also serve somewhat as product owners. We have a whole process and kind of a walkthrough for this. We've seen success here. I'm out today to be able to ask for volunteers that would be interested in this next period from September 5th to October 14th. That's the 6 weeks where you would actually have the commitment of the 6-week sprint, or rather 6 weeks, 1 week sprint for 6 weeks long. And then also we would have our trainings from July 30th to August 12th. So if this is something that interests you, my email here is at egordon.project@gmail.com. We'll get a more Job Hackers email and we'll have a form and everything, but I wanted to be able to get ahead of the game a little bit and reach out to people now. If they have time to commit, it is, a quarter of a work week for 6 weeks, but it's a great way to be able to give back to the community and be able to pay it forward with all the knowledge and time that we do have. Now, whether you are currently working or whether you have been a Scrum Master in the past, we'd love to be able to have a conversation with you. So hopefully that covers everything, Ben.
All right. Thanks a lot, Edward, for that announcement and great work you're doing. And then thank you again to Jill for your presentation today. Any parting thoughts from you, Jill?
Just want to thank everybody. Thanks for your comments, your questions, your feedback. It's been really fun. What a good group you guys are. Hope to see you all again.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks.
I'm so sorry. Last question. Do we have access to these slides? I know one person joined really late and I want to give her the opportunity.
So I was just going to put it in the chat. I was going to, but I can't. So
Okay.
Could they be posted to the meetup possibly?
Oh, can I do that? Yeah, I have it ready to go.
Yep. I'll send you a link to the meetup page,
Perfect.
Jill, and
Thank you.
feel free to post as a comment there. And yep, we will also have this recording up on the YouTube channel at some point as well for Agile Austin. And look forward to your podcast and your YouTube channel as well, Jill. So
Sweet. Oh, and thanks.
Great.
If Joe's still on, I just clicked on your links. Thanks for sharing those. You guys want to check those out before you jump off.
excellent. Well, thanks.
All right.
As our president Max likes to say, we start on time, we end on time. We are ending right on time.
This meeting will end itself.
Thanks for joining, folks.
All right,
Appreciate
see
it.
you guys.
Thank
Have a good
Jill.
weekend.
Thank
Thank
so
you.
much,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.